Well, it's the one that's been circled on the calendar all year long, and it's already here. Let's talk about it. Kentucky, UCLA.
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey everybody, it's Zach Anderson-Yox. I'm your favorite Locked On UCLA host, D1 play-by-play broadcaster, and diehard UCLA fan. Well, we got a big one as UCLA prepares to take on Kentucky. This episode is brought to you by BetOnline, and certainly whether you're going to bet UCLA to win or make some money if they lose, who knows? Just know this episode is brought to you by BetOnline. Better odds and trends and lines than ever before with BetOnline. That's where the game starts. So thanks for making this your first listen each and every day. UCLA. Well, we know what they're doing. They're 6-0 in the last 6 games. Kentucky, they won the last 4 straight games. So combined, these two teams' last 10 games, they've won every single one of them. These are two teams with 2 losses apiece, as red hot as it gets into mid-December, arguably without being undefeated. And two teams that have taken very tough losses. UCLA, who came through, had that tough weekend in Vegas, losing to Illinois and Baylor. And then Kentucky, mind you, their first loss came in double overtime in a neutral site to Michigan State in Oscar Tshiebwe's first game when he was coming off of offseason surgery and then coming off the bench, losing in double overtime before a quote-unquote road, but not the full home site for Gonzaga, where they lost to Gonzaga and got beat down. And both teams have been humbled and ready and prepared for this game. And I think they figured it out. This isn't one team that's mighty feeling their britches. This is a rested Kentucky team and a UCLA team that just showed out in a dominant, absolutely demolishing of Maryland. So where does that put this game? Well, you can go over the historical significance, the two biggest brands in men's college basketball, the two most championships all time. This is the 16th meeting. UCLA trails Kentucky 7-8, 7 wins, 8 losses. But this could be the first time ever where the two teams all time are equal head to head if UCLA wins this game against Kentucky, as UCLA has the all time national titles edge, just not the head to head matchup, except for John Wooden's last game, arguably the most important game that they've ever played between these two sides. So UCLA, it's going to come down to one very simple thing. Can they stop Oscar Tshiebwe, the reigning National Player of the Year, where UCLA, in Mick Cronin's tenure, they tend to have the 6'9", 6'10" big man, Cody Riley, not the most athletic and a bit banged up last year. And then now you get a Dembona, the true freshman, who showed out against Maryland, 7 of 8 shooting, double figures, 7 rebounds, about 14, 16 points for Bona. But it's a much different matchup when you take on Oscar Tshiebwe. You have a big man down low against a very inexperienced freshman from Nigeria, as Tshiebwe, the transfer from West Virginia, his second year of Kentucky, shockingly staying for one more year out in Kentucky, and the Bruins in a neutral site matchup in New York, although I'm very certain that it'll be heavily decorated in Kentucky blue versus UCLA blue and gold, but I can be surprised. We'll see how many people made the cross-country road trip to go watch UCLA play in person against the Wildcats. I'm just certain it's going to be a very pro-Kentucky crowd. So what we'll determine is a road game. This game is going to come down to Bona and the UCLA big men playing well against Kentucky's Oscar Tshiebwe. There's many different ways you can go up and down this list, but Kentucky's only loss came to, well, not only loss, but their loss most recently to Gonzaga when they lost by 18, 16 points, 82-72 back on November 20th, almost a month prior to this UCLA-Kentucky matchup. What's the one thing that Mark Few has had with his Gonzaga teams? I counted it. They had 5 players who are 6'10 and taller. Not everybody made an impact or played that game. And of course, led by Drew Timme, speaking of big men coming back. But Gonzaga is a team who in that game out-rebounded Kentucky. And while Oscar Tshiebwe, he didn't play bad. At least you look at the numbers. You can go into the minute details of it in different ways. Gonzaga was very big, very long. And when you get to the minute details of a double overtime loss against Michigan State, Kentucky led at the end before Michigan State late bucket, I believe, forced overtime or double overtime, I forget. And then if you go to double overtime, it all hits the fan anyways when you play an extra 5 to 10 minutes. when Oscar Tshiebwe wasn't even starting. So in their true loss on the road in Gonzaga, came down to big men, and it came down to back and forth against Michigan State. And UCLA so far has been physical, forcing turnovers, having good defense, getting the rebounds, points in the paint have been important. But can they get that physical presence defensively against Oscar Tshiebwe, a guy who averages a double-double, leads the team in scoring, does it all? And what was one of the biggest things that helped him dominate last year was about his 15, 16 rebounds per game that helped them win all those national accolades as Player of the Year, SEC Player of the Year, all those for John Carab for, Cal squad, for Kentucky. Can UCLA, can Bona specifically have a big game, not get baited into foul trouble, not give Tshiebwe so many extra free throws, shots, whatever, and hit the glass with this athleticism going back and forth down low in the paint. And if it's not him, is it Nuba? Does Mac Etienne come in and get some minutes? Not sure how much he can play, and having not played more than 5-6 minutes at a time at most. Can UCLA stack up the big men? Is Mick Cronin going to go 1, 2, 3 to shuffle the big men and give him different matchups and see who can be quick enough, who can be good enough to box out Tshiebwe and the Kentucky Wildcats down low? That is where this game will be won and lost mostly because it's a little different. Maryland lived and died by the three. Kentucky can enforce and impose their will in the paint with a dominant force that arguably is a very big mismatch for UCLA. It is what it is, and that is the thing. I'm not so certain UCLA can win that matchup. And barring, David Singleton scoring another 20, practically he had 18 against Maryland, and UCLA shooting lights out from downtown, which is not exactly what they're really designed to do, right? They're not exactly designed to go shoot 15 threes and make those to beat a Kentucky team. They like to be physical and be dominant. But Tshiebwe seems like a big mismatch that UCLA obviously has to key on. And while there's various other ways this game can go, if you're going to get dominated in the paint, dominated in the rebounds on a neutral site, then you're not going to win that game. But this is where UCLA can try and turn around the historical significance of this game and get a big win for either side that can vault them back in the top 10 and a true top 5 competition for the rest of the country as they work their way up the rankings for the SEC versus the Pac 12 and future Big Ten school in UCLA. So, in a game where so much is on the line, so much historical significance, everything going back and forth, it's going to come down to the paint. Can UCLA stop it? I'm not entirely sure, but you can certainly bet on it, right? Because BetOnline, well, they've got the best odds, lines, and betting information, stats, news, and analysis, your number one source for all those things. Just get the latest odds and trends with every professional and amateur league out there. You can go check on the World Cup final, get Argentina, France, back and forth, college football, bowl season, pro football, everything in basketball. They've got it all with betonline.net. If you love sports podcasts and betting, they got your betting fix as well. They're the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts, where it starts. As we move forward into UCLA and Kentucky in this interesting battle here on a neutral site, West Coast, they've been moving this, not exactly Champions Classic, I forget what they call it here, but they've had this Ohio State, North Carolina, UCLA, Kentucky, CBS Sports Classic is what it's called this year, go back and forth, and this is UCLA's year to play Kentucky, albeit not in Vegas. They get to go to New York, Madison Square, prime time, 5 p.m. on the East Coast, 2:15 just around there, depending on when the North Carolina-Ohio State game goes. And funny enough, I didn't even realize how big of a college basketball day it is. I know bowl season started, and that's fun. And pro football, they're going to have all their games starting on Saturdays now and yada, yada, yada. But this could be an epic college basketball day because you have, by my count, 6 ranked matchups or close to it in this Saturday alone. On December 17th, just alone, UCLA, Kentucky, which I think is the standalone, but arguably couldn't even be the best game of the day because you got Tennessee, Arizona, Virginia, Houston, Alabama, Gonzaga, Ohio State, North Carolina. Before that one, and remember, North Carolina, the preseason number 1, not even in the polls anymore, and Indiana at Kansas. And here's UCLA, Kentucky, where it might not be the best game, the most rankings significant at this moment. It should easily be the game that's the most watched, most tuned into, and carry the most weight, as this is Mick Cronin's first chance to fight Kentucky as a UCLA head coach. Coach Cal has kind of come through to UCLA, battling them in the Final Four as a Memphis head coach, and then the last few times during the Lonzo Ball years, Von Looney years, all those years prior to Mick Cronin. This is now Mick Cronin's chance to etch his name into this full rivalry between UCLA and Kentucky, 15 all-time matchups that UCLA has never led in this series. They're down 7 wins to 8 losses, but a win can equalize the all-time series 8-8 for a Bruin team that's coming off a dominant, resurgent win over a top 20 team in Maryland where they led start to finish. And if that UCLA team comes through and dominates, then maybe they could come through and get a win against Kentucky. It's a game where UCLA gets Maryland 87-60 victors, led by as many as 30, 36, close to 40, with a few minutes left before the scrubs came in for both sides. The bench players, emptying the bench, whatever you want to call it. Either way, the bench was emptied all the way to the bottom, especially for Maryland at the end there, when UCLA was up big at the end of the game, where the bench guys, the deep in the bench, 12th man, 13th man, 15th man, all getting in with UCLA up big over Maryland, proving, hey, this is a team where UCLA led from the entire game, never trailed, and now you're facing a team in Kentucky who's rested, and you wonder how this changed things, right? UCLA, 9 p.m. local tip-off on Wednesday night. Then you go from College Park, go to Madison Square, and get to face off against a Kentucky team that's rested, prepared, and ready to go in this one. And while I've been highlighting so far Dembona and the UCLA big men against Oscar Tshiebwe, for UCLA, it might come down to, can your stars take this over? Tiger Campbell didn't play that much against Maryland. Overall, Campbell, 15 minutes, the least amount of any UCLA starter in a game where they didn't have to play that much. I'm thinking this is a game where Jaime Jaquez Jr., Tiger Campbell, someone between Clark or Bailey. Obviously, Clark's been arguably the best player, and Bailey's been the most resurgent, important player since the UCLA 2 losses in Vegas. You can just see in his eyes and the way he plays moving forward and going into this Kentucky matchup. So for UCLA, it's going to come down to star potential for Jalen Clark, Jaime Jaquez Jr., Campbell, guys who have been there, done it before, and maybe this is a freshman standout moment for Mari Bailey. This is a chance for him to jump up the charts when it comes to NBA draft picks and NBA drafting and lottos and all those stuff, for Bailey to come through and improve his draft stock in this game alone. You win this game, you put in 30, which is an absurd total. I'm not saying he's going to do that, but you do that in this game with all the eyes across the country in college basketball watching one of the early games before people really tune in March overall across the country. This is one of those significant Saturday nights where everybody's watching basketball, NBA kind of off to the side. You have different sports. UCLA, Kentucky. That's a game you drop everything you're doing. Heck, I'm doing it. You drop, all right, you got play. Nope, there's no plans. You sit there and you watch the game and you enjoy it, either in pain or in much adoration for UCLA or Kentucky, and you just say, hey, who are the stars that are going to show up? Of course, Kentucky, top to bottom, they've got their reigning national player of the year, but they've got other players, right? But UCLA, if they focus on themselves, then quite frankly, they might not have to focus on anything other than rebounding and defense. It's going to come down to star potential. And while it came down to Maryland and UCLA, came down to the bench, McCrone probably going to have a much tighter rotation, a starting 5, 6, and 7, if you include the first, second, or third guys off the bench, who are fairly rested at the end of the game against Maryland with such a wide margin of victory. This Cronin crew is going to be very tested in terms of depth at the end of the game when it comes to 6, 7 deep. It's against a Kentucky team who has 4 guys in double figures. Oscar Tshiebwe, 16 points overall. Has the likes of, just kind of messing this up here, you have Antonio Reeves, Jacob Toppin, Carson Wallace. Those are the guys that average close to 10 points per game up and down the list. You have Wheeler, Frederick. Those are guys who are all been important for Kentucky this year. But again, it starts with Tshiebwe, and then it comes down to, can UCLA continue to play defense as they do? Kentucky overall this year, close to 40% from downtown. That's one of the better marks in the country. Utah State, who sits there as an undefeated team in the country, they have one of the best shooting marks, 43%, 44% from downtown. Kentucky shooting it at a 39% clip. If UCLA can run the Wildcats off the line, get their star power to come up and get ready to play and find themselves in a good ball game, then UCLA could fairly find themselves in a good one at the end. Hey, reminder, UCLA's won the last one to two of these things. Why can't they win another? They fared well in this most recent decade, arguably the most important coming in the Sweet 16 between these two, and UCLA not winning that one in the Lonzo Ball, De'Aaron Fox rematch. But in this one, UCLA comes through, and they've got to have their stars show up. A bonus just got to focus on defense, but the stars have to show up, and can they run Kentucky off the 3-point line? Because they shoot it at a pretty good clip. Where UCLA, that's not what they're designed to do. They're designed to get in the paint, but Tshiebwe is going to dominate the rebounding. Can the Bruins be physical? This is a physical game, and they came out and punched Maryland in the mouth. Well, Kentucky's going to come and do the same. Can UCLA box their way in and muscle their way out with the win in what I'm describing as a road atmosphere against Kentucky? So we'll see. Just hopefully we enjoy it. Just know if you're going to watch it with some friends, you guys go over and you knock a few beers back, knock down a few drinks, whatever it is. If you're hanging out and a few becomes too many, the evening comes to an end, whether it's in victory or in silence. Just know that think of calling about a ride, right? You're sitting there, you're watching this game. Think about calling a ride. Even if you live nearby and you can make it home okay, it's no big deal, right? What's the odds that you'll get pulled over anyway? Even if you do, what's the worst that can happen? Insurance goes up, you lose your license, you lose your job, you total your car, you kill someone. Everyone knows about the risks of driving drunk. The results are tragic and often deadly. However, that doesn't stop everyone from getting behind the wheel while under the influence. Watching this game, you knock a few back? No. You should call for a ride. That's why police officers are out there right now looking for impaired drivers on our roads to save lives. So if you think you're okay to drive after a few drinks, think again. Play it safe. Plan ahead to get a ride. It takes 1 minute to change your life or someone else's. Drive sober or get pulled over. As we move on to this final segment of Locked On UCLA, well, we can move forward as, UCLA moving to the Big Ten, Dante to LA trending, DTR speaking out saying, hey, his status is up in the air for the Sun Bowl. So while he's been at practice, one would think, hey, why would you go to practice and not playing the game? We're not talking about practice, we're talking about a game. Not practice, game. No, okay. No AI, goofiness there in terms of the practice rant. But news and notes to wrap up this podcast here for Locked On UCLA. One, if you've missed it for some reason, you've forgotten everything about UCLA moving to the Big Ten. They played future Big Ten rival Maryland in basketball, beat them down. They got on the same night, moved to the Big Ten. The Regents didn't block it. They said there's potentially a Berkeley tax. You give Cal 2 to 10 million, which I'm not entirely sure how much that actually is to what UCLA is getting from the Big Ten media rights TV deal, largely from football, a little bit of basketball. And then you have the likes of the amount of money that's going to go into pouring in for the nutrition and the travel costs for everything that also isn't football in additional addendums to this release and recommendations from the UC Regents. So those are one thing. And two, there's rumors and trends that one, DJ Uiagalelei came and had his unofficial visit at UCLA. Dante Moore, as the Bruins try to rip him from Oregon's grasps as a 5-star class of 23 recruit. That's been trending on social media. That's been very, very popular. People hashtag Dante, the number 2, LA, after his official visit to UCLA. So again, you're either trying to get the 5-star quarterback, who is the probably premier product of the class of 23. You have DJ, a transfer portal guy, who's taking an unofficial visit, gathering what looks to be like, all right, some solid facilities at UCLA. And you're kind of going back and forth. Well, we've got 2 internal options. We've got 2, at minimum, 2 very good options at the top of the list of grabbing someone from another school or grabbing a commit from another school right before signing day. And then you have, will Dorian Thompson Robinson start games in the Sun Bowl and even be available along with Charbonnet and Bobo? And for the most part, those 3 have been at practice when I've learned. And for UCLA, will they play? Well, their status is up in the air, especially for DTR coming out with his comments in practice today saying, hey, I'm not entirely sure if I'll play. I've been a little nicked up, making sure my potential draft stock, my pro football prospects are okay. We'll see what happens there. Then it comes down to one, is he going to play? Will that be a football game, the bowl game of the Sun Bowl, where both starting quarterbacks aren't there for either Pitt or for UCLA, and that's coming up in 2 weeks. and then you have big basketball game. It's just all sorts of fun times being a UCLA basketball fan. And again, got to shout out the UCLA women taking out the women of Troy, quote unquote, right? UCLA taking down an unbeaten USC team, and Kerry Close's squad saying, nah, not in this house. We're a team not to be messed with. It's the UCLA women take down the Trojans. So that's going to wrap up this Locked On UCLA pod. Again, we're going to go in more depth Big Ten stuff. We're going to talk about this big week basketball wise, wrapping it up at the tail in the beginning of the next week. And just know, we'll have an immediate reaction pod following the UCLA-Kentucky matchup. Again, UCLA-Kentucky will have an immediate reaction pod following the game, for better or for worse. We'll see. We'll have a good comment section, bad comment section, whatever it is. Just know, go Bruins, knock out the Cats, and get an A-clap ready. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, UCLA. UCLA, fight, fight, fight. This has been Locked On UCLA. Go Bruins.